Hey everyone, Andre here along with Jake, Joey, Tris, and Tom to discuss Nintendo in 2023, both the games and the news headlines involving Nintendo and other wider industry trends perhaps. So, first up are the games in part 1, and part 2 will cover everything else involving Nintendo's headlines and other non-game releases like movies and theme parks. And, you know, a lot happened this year. Some have said this is the strongest year in gaming in general, of which, of course, Nintendo was a significant component of that, with 2 Game of the Year nominees at the Game Awards, to whatever extent you consider that important. But clearly Nintendo had a pretty good years. How are we feeling about Nintendo this year? Was it one of the best years for Switch ever? Was it one of the lesser ones? It's weird for me because I've seen a lot of comments being like, it was a really great year, but at the same time I've seen people being like, it's obvious that Nintendo's ending we're near the end of the Switch's life. So which is it? Can it be both? Like, what's going on here? Jake, what are your thoughts on this? What did you think of Nintendo in 2023?
Oh man, I think my thoughts on this changed month to month. This was definitely the year where, more than any other year, I think I repeated to myself over and over, man, I'm getting sick of this Switch hardware. And but then there were several months throughout the year where I was like, no, actually, this is okay. This is fine. I'm happy. This Switch OLED is keeping me good company. But definitely a lot of ups and downs. I think for me, the highlights of this year are that it is some of Nintendo's highest highs and lowest lows. There are things about the way that this company is run and the services that they invest into that make me so freaking annoyed. And then there are some games coming out that I'm like, oh, Papa Nintendo, only you can do this. So it's really all over the place this year for me.
How about you, Joey? How are you feeling?
Kind of the same, a little all over the place. A lot of people maybe have debated if this was maybe Nintendo's best year, or at least that was maybe the thoughts going into it, looking at the lineup, especially with games like Tears of the Kingdom, the surprise shadow drop of Metroid Prime Remastered, and then Mario Wonder later on throughout the year. I think it's somewhere in the middle for me, if we ever rank the Nintendo years, 2017 being the very best and 2018 being the very worst. 2023 is somewhere in the middle for me. There were some high highs, like Jake said, but some, I don't know if I would say low lows, but a lot of games that came out that just kind of came and went to me. And I don't know if that's a consequence of just this year in game releases overall, just being probably the best it's been in a long time. But yeah, that's kind of what I think. It's not Nintendo's best year, but it's far from their worst.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would put it. It's not quite their best year. There are some fantastic releases this year, some really big releases that feel kind of a parallel to 2017 when they launched. Some titles just as big, like Tears of the Kingdom to Breath of the Wild, for example. But you're right, there were some random releases this year that kind of came and went that, you remind that they came out and you go, wait, that happened? Were we aware? There's definitely a case of there's a lot of questionable decisions in the marketing this year, I think, that definitely hold it back from being their best year, but it's not close to their worst, that's for sure. But I do think it is starting to get that feeling of the Switch might be winding down. Yeah.
Tom?
For me, excuse me, we got a bit of we got some experimental games that you kind of see at the end of the life cycle. I would say Mario Wonder, that's kind of trying something new. It's not quite the same as Mario Odyssey to compare that year, but it's, it was neat. And the thing that brings this year down a bit for me is just the amount of remasters and reliance on them. With kudos to Nintendo for their planning to keep a steady amount of releases through the year, but at the same time, some of them like Mario RPG, even though people love it, it's pretty much the same experience as before. Metroid Prime Remaster, pretty similar to before. It's nice for people to get to play those again and re-experience them, but it's not the same as something brand new, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to look at it for probably everyone. There's the subjective viewpoint of which, not every game's gonna hit probably, and that's probably the case for me as well, personally. But then, you take the objective standpoint, and this is the year when Nintendo had a new 3D Zelda that comes along with once every half decade, roughly. A new 2D Mario that isn't New Super Mario Brothers, the return of Geno, Pikmin freaking 4, and a Battle Royale F-Zero? Yeah. When you look at it that way, I feel like it's hard for most other years to compete. I think it has to be objectively one of the best years outside of maybe launch year, but I think even in terms of sheer numbers, this one might have it.
That's
there
an
were-
interesting argument. That's a pretty
Yeah.
good argument, actually. I'm sorry, am I a Debbie Downer? I'm having like a crisis right now. I'm like, man, I really would like to do that experiment sometime, stacking it up against other years and see if my opinion holds. But yeah, I think the other thing is that like context is important, and the Switch is a little long in the tooth now, and there is a degree to which like having this collection of games at this particular moment in gaming means something different than it did for the Switch in 2017. You know?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good point.
Yeah.
And you are right, Andre. Like, there is a huge spread of IP here, even way more than there was in 2017. And even if it's a lot of kind of padding, so to say, from ports and re-releases like Tom mentioned, there's still a lot of like IP recognition in here that you didn't have back then. Like, I mean, you have even like Kirby and Pikmin, as you mentioned, and F-Zero all in the same year as 2D Mario and 3D Zelda. That's huge. That just is like, it's hard to not have something that you would have bought at least one thing of as a Nintendo fan this year, because they really spread to a lot of different reaches this time.
And that might even include our first release of the year. So let's go ahead and do the breakdown of what exactly happened this year. And that starts, of course, in January, specifically on January 20th, where we started off with Fire Emblem Engage. Now, did you cover that for us, Triss, or?
I did not.
Who covered that?
I think it was Dawn.
It was Dawn.
Oh, it was Dawn.
I played some of it this year.
Perfect. Let us know, how is it looking back on that game now, Jake?
Yeah, you know what's funny about that game is that I talk about this in like the novel writing workshop that I run. It's sometimes like your pitch is more important than your actual content. And I think that game has a crisis of pitch. It doesn't have a strong premise in the same way that Fire Emblem Three Houses did, where it's like, oh, you're in a school. It kind of looks like Persona. There's the 3 different academies. It's like all of these like iconic things that you remember and can get attached to even before you play the game. But like Fire Emblem Engage, like the pitch was kind of, oh, we're going back a little bit. Like this is like we're doing fan service for people kind of like already in the know. And it wasn't quite, it didn't quite have that grip on me as somebody who's not a longtime Fire Emblem fan as Three Houses did. So if you're asking me between those two games, which one I would recommend, I would always recommend Three Houses first. But it's still like in that genre of game, it's still like fun and serviceable and like a pretty good time. It's just kind of, it's there. It is a Fire Emblem game. It's not at the top of the list, but I don't think it's at the bottom for anybody.
That's exactly what I've heard from a lot of people too, like fans of it. Like nobody like hates it from what I've heard, but nobody thinks it's like, you know, this is the new direction for Fire Emblem. Like it is a solid entry in the series, and that's all that needs to be said on it from what I've heard.
I think it's tough when the main mechanic is like you have these rings and you can like summon these other characters and it like changes your advantage, disadvantage state, you know? And I think it's hard for me when the main mechanic or like the main gimmick of a game is something I just like don't like that much and like didn't want to engage with. So so like that part of it, I found myself like having a hard time going back to that game, even though I wanted that kind of game in my life. Ended up filling it later with Persona 5 Tactica, baby, but that's all.
All right, well, that wasn't the only thing Nintendo had for the month, at least in terms of any kind of release, because on January 27th, we got a big game on Switch Online in the form of GoldenEye 007, launching the same day as on the Xbox as well. So definitely a unique deal they had here with Microsoft, of course. You know, or between what all the parties that own this IP. I think it's like a combination of Rare, Nintendo, the movie production
MGM.
company, and Xbox, maybe Microsoft. I don't know. Very confusing. MGM. Thank you, Tom. In any case, we're not going to break down every NSO release this year, but I do want to start off with GoldenEye, but that is a big one. And actually, I just realized too, even bookend the end this year with Rare games, with Jet Force Gemini launching at the end of the year too. So we'll touch on more on this later. But did anyone else play GoldenEye here?
We had a whole stream, remember? It was one of the most
that's
fun,
right.
It was one of the most fun streams we did this year.
That was
I
fun.
thought it was like we all had our boxes and we were all in the, you know what I mean? And it was I really like reignited a love for that game that I didn't know I had this year. And it was so fun like talking to my dad, who really liked it back when he played it like on N64, and he like remembered all of it, and we were just, it was like a surprisingly jolly time. I'm glad that it got to show up here on the Switch, and I really appreciated our I liked going back with like the weird control scheme and trying to get myself in like that mindset for the game. I liked that, but then I also liked that video we made where it was like, oh, here's how you can make it so it's like more comfortable for you. I thought that was cool.
They just how to make it not garbage, pretty much. Like, I don't know why they, like, They made it so it played perfectly fine on an Xbox controller on Xbox, but for the Switch virtual console, not virtual console, whatever it's called, version, it was just like you really couldn't play that game unless you already had one of those Nintendo 64 controllers. Because if you tried playing it with a Pro controller, it just did not work. You had to like go in and fix all those settings. I don't remember if I did that video, but it was just way too much. I played it on Xbox mostly.
That's
actually what. Tom, please.
I was gonna say that's one of the downsides of NSO for N64 Online. Like you really need that controller, and how it was online on Nintendo but not online on Xbox. That I find though going back to it, just having that smooth frame rate makes it way easier than it was like just playing on N64.
Yeah, that's a great point. On some level, like technically, it was better than it's ever been before. On officially, at least I believe, outside of maybe the Xbox version, though I know that one had its own issues as well. But yeah, it ran at a smooth frame rate, looked sharp. To a degree that if you played on the original hardware, you never had this before. But at the same time, we were much more forgiving back then, so it is nice to experience it this way. But it's more like that game would basically be unplayable if it didn't inherently run better. So having to be online, and it worked surprisingly well in our testing, that was awesome. But Joey, I think it does speak to, the fact that they, one of the unfortunate things about the Switch Online is if you don't have that N64 controller, as Tom was saying, you're kind of screwed. Like, these games don't play as well. Jet Force Gemini once again exemplified this, and GoldenEye especially because it even has a widescreen mode. But most people wouldn't even know to toggle it on because you need to go in, change that setting, and it's like, I wish Nintendo would go just a little farther with these. If not at the least add an information screen about the game, but maybe have some of these settings on by default. Maybe tweak it a little bit so it does run well. Because there's all these rare games on Rare Replay that have been enhanced, and now we get Jet Force Gemini, an arguably worse version of it. It's like, it's a bit of a bummer in that sense when you feel like they could do a little bit more to polish them up and make them more palpable to modern audiences. But it was still, at the end of the day, GoldenEye is still a lot of fun, especially having an N64 controller, and I actually want to do another stream now, Jake, now that we've brought it up.
Oh, so fun.
All right, well, speaking of NSO, let's move into February, where we have Game Boy and Game Boy Advance launching on the service, I believe, which actually is shocking to me because it seems so much longer ago now. Is this right? Did they launch in February? On my birthday, no less? So, what do we think of that? Like, I remember, I forget what all launched with specifically, but I remember GBA having a handful of games. And I'm like, I wish there were a few more here.
There weren't that many at launch, but it launched with like Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. Like, it had some pretty solid starting games. I remember finding it really funny because I had like just finished Superstar Saga for our like weekly streams like the week before. So it was just really funny timing. But I mean, it's a really strong lineup actually. I just wish more got added to it throughout the year. For Game Boy Advance, at least. I'm sure we'll touch upon that more later. But
Chris, no, this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
This is the sweet. This is what I'm talking about with this sweet and sour Nintendo, man. They come out here and they're like, "Oh, we got the GBA. You love GBA, Jake." And I'm like, "Do I?" I start playing them and I go, "Oh, I do. You're right, Nintendo." And then it's like been like 10 months and they've added like 4 games or something to this. I'm like, "Are you kidding me, dude?" And it's like, I think like it's such a vast library for this console in specific. And I've been really surprised at like how well these games are translating to a modern setting. And just for me, maybe this is just like my age or whatever, I've not had nostalgia hit on the Nintendo Switch Online like it has been hitting with these games. This is making me go, oh, turns out this is all I did as a child. I remember every minute of these games. So I was like so hot on it originally because it feels like there's this promise with the NSO games. And then like month after month, and I think part of the issue is that when they are announced, it feels like random and it just doesn't, and it's like not exciting and they don't do anything with these games. And I don't know, there's so many like little issues that I have with this that it's such a shame because between the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance, there's so much cool stuff on here, and I wish I could be here at the end of the year going, this was an awesome addition, so glad it was here. But I don't know, I just can't. At the end of the day, it feels like a missed opportunity, and I kind of feel like Nintendo is losing to the growing market of handhelds that are like either playing the ROMs or things that are like the analog pocket, where it's like this is something that is popular right now that people are really enjoying, and I feel like Nintendo is just like watching that pass them by.
Yeah, I definitely think the Game Boy Advance side of it specifically was like really lacking this year. Like I can name like 2 updates that I got this year off the top of my head, like Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, for example. Like it didn't have that kind of regular updates that the N64 had. And the N64 slowed down for a little while at the start of this year before picking back up and kind of overtaking all the other ones for some reason. It's very strange, the pacing they have with this. I think the Game Boy Color was actually alright, because I think every time the NES and SNES updated, that one also got some. I remember in the middle of the summer they added both Oracle games at the same time, you know, Legend of Zelda Oracle Seasons and Ages. So I think the Game Boy and Game Boy Color side of it was like alright, it could have been better, whereas the Game Boy Advance side was just disappointing after launch, unfortunately.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I want to point out quickly though, like Analog Pocket, could Nintendo be reacting to that a bit? But there's probably so few units of Analog Pocket out there compared to the Switch audience that that's the thing. Maybe Nintendo looks at this and thinks like there's not actually that many people playing Game Boy games, but it's neat to see the history. I hope they do more with it. I hope it's one of those things where Nintendo can't do 2 things at once sometimes, like back in the day where it's like, well, we have a handheld and a console. Like we can only focus on one really at the same time, which made Switch so great. So maybe we'll see the N64 games peter out here and more Game Boy Advance games next year. Hopefully. Yeah. Hopefully.
That would be nice.
The Game Boy games in particular are like a really good fit for this, which is handheld aspect, because these games are meant to be played on the go, like generally in shorter bursts. Yeah. And it kind of speaks to what Jake was saying, or he has this, there's both a nostalgia for this, but also a lot of these games, maybe not a lot, the games so far on the service, like they I think myself, they hold up. Like it represents a style of gameplay that's kind of gone out of date. We don't really see these types of games anymore, and that's why the Analog Pocket resonated so much with me when that launched, a couple years ago now. And something that the Switch service does better that the Analog Pocket doesn't, and really hasn't been done, is that, at least officially, that these games are online for the first time ever. Like, you can now play these games, like, with your friends across country. We can play the Pokemon trading card game, Jake, which we still need to do, have that card battle, as if we're playing the card game in person, which is freaking epic. I love that. And that's really neat, especially because these games actually run better, the Game Boy games run better online than the 64 or SNES games do. This is not dependent on, the music isn't tied up to the whole, state the game's being run at or whatever, because you're running your own individual elements of the game, and that just works better online. So that's really cool. I just wish Nintendo would finally add the ability to play with anyone. Like, not necessarily matchmaking, but let's make a friend lobby or something that anyone can enter, rather than just your friends. But that's super annoying, especially if you're a streamer like we are sometimes. So.
Well, and I think something really quick too. So the other thing that I want is, like, you know how we've like got a Nintendo Switch News app? I wish like the delivery mechanism for telling us about this stuff was different. I feel like every so often it'll just be like 9 o'clock at night, and I'll see like in the work Discord, like, oh, they uploaded the trailer for the new NSO games, and I'm like, why?
Yep.
Like, what is this? It's like, it feels like an afterthought. It feels like it's somebody like on their way out of an office being like, oh, gotta set it live, and I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, it is so weird to me that I know, like, the first Tuesday of the month I get the new PlayStation Plus games.
Right.
And Nintendo does not have something in my brain like that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's here's a random Thursday, hey, next week, same as that time, you'll get this game.
Yeah,
or a random Monday, or a random Monday, and it's right now. Like, it's kind of...
The best example is them dropping the biggest N64 drop of the year during the freaking Game Awards.
Yeah.
What were they thinking with that?
Yep.
Maybe like the traffic's so low, it literally doesn't matter. I mean, I don't know what the traffic numbers are for these games, but maybe Nintendo's like, it doesn't matter when we publish this. Same amount of people are gonna play it regardless. But as one who covers these games as well, it's like, it's nice to have a heads up. Like, I can plan my schedule. I want to show these games off. I want the community to be engaged. They want to know about these games, and that's difficult when we're already covering one of the biggest gaming events of the year, and I don't know what they were thinking with that, but especially because they didn't announce it at the Game Awards, it was just randomly during them.
I had an idea, like, thinking back to the, I forget how you even pronounce this, the Atari, the karate one that came out, and they had, like, a documentary of it. Like, if they're releasing these old games, and if Nintendo had, like, an ass column about them,
amazing.
or, like, a quick video with the developers, like, why they're so special, that might be a neat way to kind of make them more important.
The Making of Karateka, Tom.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jake.
yeah. Really, really cool documentary / game. Tom, I'm 100% with you. And they already are like they inch up to this. Like the WarioWare game comes out on Switch and they're like, hey, here's the GBA WarioWare game kind of around the same time. And I'm like, why are you not? You're right there.
Yeah,
like,
right
you
there.
could almost do something here where you're like talking to your consumer about something that Nintendo has over other people in the industry is that they have these franchises that have been around for decades, whereas most other, video game makers do not. And it's like crazy to me that they don't take advantage of this and that idea in ways like this. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not just the IP, Jake. They have these developers who've been around for decades still at the company, which, sadly, that's not going to be the case forever. And I think there is more they could be doing here to kind of like promote their legacy, these games, and you kind of create just like a stronger ecosystem of what exactly this library is. And I think that really is a missed opportunity. That could be amazing.
Yeah.
In any case, we're planning on discussing NSO later. I think we covered it for now. So we'll move on to the next game.
Fires me up.
We're the only ones who care about this. No one else cares.
I know.
On the same day as Game Boy and GBA, we had what I think, for me, was one of the most surprising and biggest announcements of the year, putting aside the fact it'd been rumored for decades before this, seemingly. Metroid Prime Remastered finally coming out, same day as it being announced in the Switch, in the Direct, I believe, and it looked amazing. It looked so freaking good. Joey, you were there for this. You were covering it. What's it like looking back on this game now? Almost a year later.
It's remastered. Tom, it's remastered.
Yeah.
Yeah, watch my reaction video for that. That was insane. And I'm so glad they shadow dropped it, because I feel like some pre-release marketing for this game would have just been like, okay, I've seen this before, but just remastered. So I'm very glad they decided to shadow drop it with a physical release 2 weeks later, which I also got. So that was just fantastic, and it exceeded my expectations. Right, like this game has been rumored for so long, and I thought like, okay, so it's gonna look moderately better, maybe, given Nintendo's history with remasters. Like they don't go all out on their remasters historically, at least. But here it was just a straight up visual remake. Like it's called remastered because I guess it uses the same code. But just the fact that it looks so much better might just be the best looking Switch game. It is the best looking Switch game in my opinion. But they also still made it look and feel like the original game. That's a very hard task to do for a remake, remaster, what have you. And they just pull it off in spades. And for the longest time, I thought, okay, maybe a part of my love for Metroid Prime is the nostalgia. Maybe parts of this game haven't aged that well to me. It's still, the remaster's the third highest rated game of the year, which is, last I checked, it was the third highest rated game of the year on Metacritic, which is insane. And I'm just like, goes to show, this game, still great, still fantastic, and the best looking game on Switch, hands down.
There really is something special about the hype factor to it. The way they handled it, the shadow drop and then the physical release 2 weeks later, that generated so much energy for this game that, you're right, I don't think it would have been there had we known about it like 3-4 months out. And they're slowly hyping it up. Like, there was something special about this. And it performed pretty well for what it was, too, and the way it was handled. Like, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised about it.
Yeah, I think this is an example of how a remake should be done. I mean, Halo's done something similar with their remakes of, I think, Halo 1 and Halo 2, which also use the same code and had a cool option where you could toggle between the two. But one of the complaints I have heard lobbed at that game is that, like, in some levels, for instance, they kind of like missed the mark when it came to the atmosphere, and that's something I think Metroid Prime didn't. That's not a mistake Metroid Prime Remastered made, in my opinion. Like, they really captured the essence of every area, to my recollection, and just stepped up the quality of the presentation while retaining almost everything else about the game, because, as Joey was saying, it's, as far as we know, the same code running underneath, by and large, and that's impressive. Like, this is almost like the gold standard for remasters, I would say, minus the fact I feel like they could have added a few modern features or tweaked a few things to make it a little better. That side, though, pretty much perfect. Looks amazing. One of the best looking Switch games out there. And,
I can't go back to the original. I can't go back to the original anymore. I
just wish they added the lighting, Joey. I just miss that cool effect when you shoot a ball, a blast down the hallway and it illuminates the entire hallway. That's one thing they need. I wish I could patch in.
Joey, sometimes I just like to see my reflection.
Also, that one little thing. But yeah, I think if this is how Nintendo handles remakes going forward, I think, assuming they make more, which based on one at the end of the year we have here, they may. I think this is actually really and another one coming up next year. This is actually really exciting, I think. It preserves what the original was while just making it so it doesn't look, like a 20-year-old game. So
And there was also something special about this being kind of the start of them really dipping into the GameCube library, too.
Oh, that's true.
Outside of Mario Sunshine on Mario 3D All-Stars. Like, this was the start of Nintendo starting to give some more attention to the GameCube library, which as we go through, we see kind of starts to persist through the year.
Yeah, and we'll I'm sure we'll have even more thoughts on that in our looking ahead to 2024 discussion as well. So
I just want to say at the end of 2022, we all placed some bets, and one of those bets was, will there be a new Metroid release in 2023?
That's right.
And Tris, Joey, and Andre all said yes.
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 Me and Tom said no. We said no. I believe I called it a dead franchise. So
Jake, can we argue that it's not a new Metroid?
I looked in the verbiage, Tom. I've watched that video, and we take the L. I'm so sorry.
Now I'm afraid to hear what your guys' thoughts were on F-Zero in our 2022.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to another game I don't think we'll discuss quite as long, but it's not even a Nintendo-published title, but it is a big one, being Octopath Traveler 2 on February 24th, because it was a sequel to a game that had originally launched exclusively on Switch for a time. Who played that game here? Jake. All right, Jake, what is it like looking back now on that nearly a year later at this point?
So this is probably my third favorite game that came out in 2023. I'm obsessed with it. If for my money, it's the best one of these kinds of games ever made. I would, if you ask me straight up, this is the best turn-based JRPG I have ever played.
Wow.
If anybody wants a quote, it is the Elden Ring of JRPGs.
Oh, wow.
But I really like this game. I think this game understands its content and its structure. It is a game that in its storytelling understands that the problems that all of these characters face, that they face are not individual problems, and they're institutional or systemic or societal, and they are solved by upholding each other, uplifting each other, and working together. And that's what makes it so cool when you have these 8 different characters you play as, and over the course of the game, they do come together and they do help each other out. And it's super cohesive, and I find that for a video game, the words on the page are better than I typically expect them to be. There are some turns of phrases and just little sentences in here that I was actually impressed with, and was wow, this is more than I'm used to getting from this kind of game. So I really liked it. I think it's beautiful on the Switch OLED.
Wow.
Yeah, top tier game.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds deeper than most. It almost sounds like, does JRPG could stand for Jake RPG?
Whoa, Jake RPGs? Wow, wait a second. I'm going to think a lot about this later. Jake RPGs?
All right.
Man.
That same day as Octopath Traveler 2, we had a release from Nintendo being Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Tress, I believe you primarily covered that for us. So now a year out, how's that look? How's that like looking back?
I'm still very happy with this. Kirby's Return to Dreamland was always like a very beloved Kirby game. I mean, it's one you could play in 4-player co-op multiplayer. There was a lot to do in it. It was a very solid 2D Kirby experience. People always loved it. This remake of it, I love the art style to it still. I think it looks very pretty, and the amount of different things you could do in this game, all the different mini games, are just a good fun party experience. So looking back on this, I'm actually very happy we got this year. Considering we typically get a Kirby release of some sorts almost every year, and they're usually small mini games. Getting a remake of a beloved Kirby game for modern audiences with new content too, even new story content, genuinely a really good time. I'm happy with it.
Nintendo's got to fill that Kirby quota somehow.
I just started playing this game, by the way, and Tris, I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I don't get this game. I'm so sour about this game. This I think got me in my doomer phase of Nintendo and remakes a little bit during the year, where I was oh god, we just slap the word deluxe on something and call it a day. But I think it was hard after. So if you remember our end of the year discussions last year, I had not really played Forgotten Land, and I missed it, and I ended up picking it up at the beginning of this past year, and was oh my god, everybody was right, this game rips. And then after that, going to this Kirby game, I was oh my god, this does not rip. This is like, and I just think like Nintendo does this thing way too much where the gimmick in the game is thing get big. And I'm just like, I can't do this. I can't like press a button, you do like a screen clearing attack, and that's like half the game. It's like sweet, and Kirby's like a good boy. But like, I don't know, there's something about it that I'm like, it feels too easy in every sense of the word.
Mm.
That's just kind of Kirby, though.
I know,
I can understand that.
But the whimsy of Forgotten Land, I think, left such an impression on me that it was tough. Now, Tris, I have not gotten to the Magolor epilogue thing yet, which I feel like everybody loves. So I gotta wait, and maybe I'll change my but
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll have to talk about what we predict 2024's Kirby will be when we get to that.
Oh man.
There is something else that actually did bring us to the end of February, but there was something else that we overlooked in the month, and that was the part 1 of the Splatoon 3 DLC. What was the name for it? The Inkopolis something, was it? Or
It's like
whatever.
bringing back Inkopolis Square for the first wave of their DLC.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm trying to remember what all it added. It added the Inkopolis hub, which is now my default hub.
Wasn't that
but
it?
Anything else?
No,
I think that was literally it.
Wow.
maybe
Amazing.
like
I
some
still
outfits
remember-
or something. Maybe some like nonsense you got. You know what I mean?
If I remember correctly, it was part 1 of this DLC was here's Inkopolis as a hub. Part 2 is the side order, which they said, will be coming sometime later. Which we then only actually learned more about a few months ago, and is coming next spring.
Can
So
you
more than a year
believe,
after
dude?
this.
Tris, how is that possible? How is it not out yet?
This Inkopolis thing should have been a pre-order bonus for getting that DLC
Yep.
3 to 5 months before it actually released.
Tell him, Tris.
Not whatever it is we got here.
Read
It's
them.
not.
Yep.
It's not a wave, and it's got to just be they see. It's got to be like they managed to fill up the schedule this year, and they're just saving the good part of the DLC.
It's not a wave, dude. Oh my god.
No,
It's like a little ripple.
It does feel a little, I don't know if dishonest is the best word, but a little dishonest, because like when you have part 1 or part 2 or however they wave 1, wave 2, whatever name they applied there, it felt like they're putting them on equal footing essentially, and that's not what they are.
No.
This is a skin for your hub, which is kind of mind-blowing that this even exists, even though I am using it. and then you have the actual main content coming over a year, probably. Do we have a date for it yet, even? Over a year later?
No, it's just spring, which,
Yeah, probably.
yes,
It's over a year later.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me. I mean, it's not the worst offense, it's just weird. I don't know why they announced it that way. And it really did make Inkopolis seem like a bigger thing than it was, but
Right.
weird. All right, let's move on to March, where we have Bayonetta Origins launching on March 17th. I believe the only Nintendo game for the month. Joey, you covered it. What's it like looking back on this now? But I remember at the time
what did you score this, Joey?
I gave this game a liked.
Okay.
I was varying between a mixed and a liked, but when I looked back at it, there was really nothing to be mixed on. This game does what it sets out to do, and it does it just good enough. and I was still like, I was pleased by the conclusion of the game too. I found boss was good, the conclusion of the story was good, but overall, I never thought about it again. It was, it seemed like it had a really ambitious idea. It had a really good art style, and just the idea of controlling 2 characters at once is really cool. But it doesn't do anything that interesting. Like I said, it just does things good enough. Like there are puzzles where he plays 2 characters. That was cool, I guess. I struggle to describe this game in detail because it did everything like just fine. It was a fine game.
Was this full price? Do you remember?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
And I don't think it should have been.
I feel the same way about Kirby. Honestly, it's like you could relieve yourself of some sins if you come out at 40 bones.
Yeah.
Metroid Prime Remastered was 40 bones, and that was
Are you sure it
very
was
good.
40? I thought digitally
40.
it was less.
No, it was 40 on
Okay.
both. Yeah, but yeah, Bayonetta Origins was just fine, really. It was very unimpactful, if anything.
Just thinking about Bayonetta Origins now, in retrospect, it's very interesting that is the last Bayonetta that Kamiya worked on now, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
I don't
Because
even
he
know how
ended
much
up leaving a few months later, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. I will say, I mean, I think I haven't played Bayonetta Origins. I'm not the biggest Bayonetta fan in general. It's just not my type of game. But I do love the idea of games like this. You know, these little secondary side options, which kind of, you know, maybe it shouldn't be $60 because it looks to be a smaller version, you know, of the main game essentially. But I like it. I think it's a cool idea exploring more about this IP in a different space. It's something I wish like more games had the freedom to do. Like I think Splatoon, since we were just talking about, is like ripe for a style of gameplay, a lot of this, you know, where you do have a different entry point into this world. But yeah, it sounds like, though, in Joey's case, like, you know, maybe he didn't go far enough with it. Or maybe it did, I don't know. But maybe the concept wasn't strong enough to be amazing. But, All right, moving on. We're moving into April now. On April 21st, we had, this game had a long story to its release, being Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, a remake of the first two, at least in the West, I think, Advance Wars games. And this game was originally scheduled for release over a year prior, I think, on April 8th, 2022, delayed because of the unfortunate circumstances involving the Ukraine war, which I still think was probably a good, smart move. I don't know if the full handling of this was the smartest move. Just with when it did eventually release, it felt like no one was talking about it. It felt like even Nintendo kind of forgot about it, kind of just pushed it out there, get it out of the way, and you know, its sales may have been affected by the whole circumstance involving it. But from my understanding, it's a good, faithful remake of the original. Did you end up playing it, Tom? Or
I played it for a few hours. I still have to go through the second campaign, but no, it kept the spirit of Advance Wars there. It's definitely like well done in its execution and stuff. Just timing of it just was weird. That's what affected it in the end.
It deserved better. I felt like it deserved better.
It deserved better for sure.
It's tough. I wonder, like, if straight up, like, the marketing plans for this game were so shifted that, like, entire teams of people probably weren't even, like, they're probably just doing other stuff. Like, the degree to which the delay disrupted this game's plans, we'll probably, like, never know the full extent of it. But it seems like it was drastic because I barely remember this game coming out. And, like, honestly, you know what I mean? And I don't remember seeing, like, anything about it or even, like, I don't know. It's like a blur.
Yeah.
When Tears of the Kingdom came out, I kind of forgot about it, so that's why I've gone back to it. And it's like they had a plan, and then there's the Ukraine war, so they kind of scrapped that plan. And then maybe they just didn't want to bring any attention to it whatsoever for fear of backlash.
Which really sucks too, especially because this wasn't an internally developed Nintendo project. This was done by Way Forward, I believe. And, you know, I don't know how that affects them financially. I don't know how those arrangements work. Maybe they're paid a flat fee by Nintendo. I have no idea. But even still, like, that has to be a bummer to have worked on this game and see it just kind of, like, pushed out there like a fart in the wind, you know? And
for everyone, for everybody keeping track, though, we're 4 months into the year. 3 remakes already.
I was thinking that. Good point.
Man, that's,
and
it's not over. So,
and they are an eclectic mix of remakes. So we have GBA, GameCube, and Wii so far, and we have at least another platform coming up soon too, or not soon, but later this year. So
Jake,
let's keep.
Well, I was gonna say, Jake, to be fair, Advance Wars is remaking 2 games. But.
Oh my God, you're right. You're right.
Good point.
4.
Wow.
4.
All right,
I feel like
keep a tally on that, Jake.
Yeah.
I feel like what might have helped Advance Wars is if it actually came out in March and they kind of doubled up on the marketing for both Bayonetta Origins and Advance Wars. There's 2 different things happening in the month that people could enjoy because they're very different audiences. And I remember them pushing Bayonetta Origins more than everyone expected them to for what it was. So,
Tris,
but like barely pushing Advance Wars. So.
Tris, don't you feel like Fire Emblem almost kind of quashed some of the conversation too with this game because they're kind of similar?
They're very similar,
yeah. So I think that didn't help it either. Yeah. Because Nintendo probably wanted to push Fire Emblem more. So.
Good point. Also, does anyone else remember the weird circumstance of like one person somehow managing to download the game early officially, and then Nintendo like shut off access to it? I think in some way. It was just wild times. I want
to be that one person one day with some weird thing. You know what I mean? I want to be the one that's like, hey, I don't know how, guys, but I got Toad in Smash Brothers. I'm playing as him right now.
Hell yeah.
That one is just the downside of having to pre-order everything. Like I don't want to pre-order a digital game. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Right, I guess they had it already downloaded and it unlocked, I think, at the normal time, which also is just interesting. Like, how were they the only one? Did no one else pre-order this? Like,
probably not.
Maybe they just didn't update their system for a while. I don't know what happened there, but just crazy circumstances, unprecedented for Nintendo as far as I'm aware, delaying an entire game for a year because of real-world circumstances. Very interesting.
Yeah.
The only other time something like that happened in terms of someone getting it early was Paper Mario Color Splash on the Wii U, where the pre-order was accidentally the full game unlocking digitally 2 weeks early.
Oh, right. Wow. Yeah, that's a mistake.
Of all games, Color Splash. And we also just had that with Beyond Good and Evil's 25th anniversary or 20th anniversary collection, which, how do you mess that up? But anyway.
All right, moving on to the final game before what might be the biggest game of the year from Nintendo, being on April 25th, Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed, which, again, in hindsight, blows me away. They released a massive game, like a game probably, minimum 100 hours, or if you're doing, a thorough playthrough, right before their other biggest game of the year. Don't know if I understand the logic of that. In any case, you probably covered this for us, right, Tris?
Yep. Yeah. Future Redeemed was really, really interesting. I talked about it rather extensively in our category awards, but I think Xenoblade 3 was my game of the year in 2022. So this big story expansion that really further tied the first two Xenoblade games together for this was such a big deal. You have the main protagonist of those games back here in this, and it was so well done. It was practically its own smaller game. They could have just released separately instead of DLC, and I think everyone would have been happy with that. So the fact that this was included as DLC as part of the expansion pack for it, it was a very solid end to this game. And that released on my birthday, so I'm pretty happy with that.
That's cool. That's pretty cool. Good trailers, this thing, by the way.
Yeah.
Every time, I have no idea what's going on. Every time I see one of those trailers, I was like, man, should I play this? This seems hype, Yeah.
So actually, Tress, what was the scale of this game? Like, I forgot that wasn't a full release, so...
Yeah, it wasn't a full release, so it was like a bit smaller than a normal Xenoblade game, but it still had a good solid at least 50 hours put into it.
Yeah, that's solid. That's
a lot. Yeah.
It's a meaty game. Meaty expansion right before another meaty game. Did anyone else play Future Redeemed here?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah. Not quite the game for the rest of us, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
But glad to hear it was good. But now let's move on to one of the tentpoles for the year. May 12th, finally launching after years of being, after years of hype, after years of its initial announcement, the sequel to one of the biggest games, or one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, a game that reinvented the Zelda series. Tears of the Kingdom finally dropping, really showing what they've been working on, being a game that takes place in the same world, but with some dramatically different mechanics, where you're literally a mechanic in the form of Ultra Hand. How do we feel now, looking back? Jake and I had a 2-hour discussion nearly, going over our thoughts, so we'll maybe circle back to that soon, but Tress, how about for you? How do you feel looking back on this now?
I mean, this was my game of the year, so we know I'm still overall very positive on it. I definitely think the years and years and years of lead up for this game might have hurt it in some ways in terms of people's expectations. I definitely think how long we've known about it, how long we were waiting for it, how secretive they were being about this game, might have hurt people's expectations for it, because they might have started expecting much bigger and more out of it, until they really started their marketing campaign a month before, and here's a bunch of the features, and it was such an odd marketing scheme that they did for Breath of the Wild and worked for what Breath of the Wild was, but for what this game was, I think more people needed to be sold on what exactly is here to temper their expectations, because I think the way this game is handled, everybody went in expecting this is going to top Breath of the Wild in every way. Surely. They spend all this time. It must. And in the ways it doesn't, that stings even more for a lot of people. Despite that, I still loved this game and what it brought to the Zelda franchise. And it as someone, like I said in our Game of the Year discussion, as someone who didn't love Breath of the Wild, I loved what this game did.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting, you kind of touched on both sides of the fan base there, and it seems like I think by and large, the overall reception to the game is still extremely positive. But it does seem like some of the more critical takes have started to formulate more in recent times. Like, in the first couple of months, you didn't hear anyone saying anything bad about this game. It's more recently now where there's some distance from it, where you are starting to get some of those complaints. I think that's almost inevitable when it comes to like a sequel, especially one of this magnitude, because everyone's got different expectations of what it should have done. You're never going to please everyone, whereas with Breath of the Wild, it's a fresh slate, and largely a fresh slate, and it's easier, I think, to meet expectations that aren't really there. So yeah, whether or not, it's fully fair to compare Tears of the Kingdom in that way to Breath of the Wild, I don't fully know. But Joey, how do you feel now looking back after all this time, over half a year out now?
Yeah, I was one of those people who really did just enjoy almost everything about this game when I first played it. I was excited to jump back in every time I wasn't playing, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah, Breath of the Wild was a lot of fun when I first played it too. But by the end of it, I finished it. I finished the main quest, and I said, okay, it's time to go back and do some other things. And then when I went back and did other things for maybe 1 or 2 hours, I kind of realized, oh, I don't want to. I've seen what there is to see I've seen what I want to see from this game. I really don't have any desire to explore a world that I've already explored before, even if it is different. And some of the negatives that come up too, in my head, just Ultra Hand in general. That is a cool concept, but it's not why I play Zelda games. I play Zelda games for the story, I play them for the dungeons, and the dungeons, though they are better here, they're not the full Zelda dungeons that I really wanted. And maybe part of that is just okay, I guess I'm just getting old, and now Nintendo's making these games for younger generations, because these games sell like crazy. They sell like crazy, but I just wish that the team could find a middle ground between the traditional Zelda and the new Zelda, and they have not struck that middle ground yet, especially in the story department, because man, that story just suffers from an experience where it's all about openness, creativity. Tackle the story objectives as many times as you want, and listen to that same imprisoning war cutscene over and over and over again, because the game doesn't know which order you're tackling the
little
objectives
seed. Let me tell you, little seed.
It's just so jarring because there's such an easy way they could have fixed that, where each one tells you a different part of it.
Yeah.
And then that way, by doing all of them, you have the whole thing. It baffles me that they opted for the same thing 4 times instead of here's a piece of it at this point, a piece of it at this point, and now you have the whole story.
It's so funny too, because this is a problem that also existed in Breath of the Wild, but to a less obvious extent, because the memories, it didn't really, even though I think there was a chronological order to them, it didn't really matter as much. But here there is a clear order to it, and I was shocked when they didn't do the thing I thought they were initially, where it didn't matter what order you found them in, they would play in order, or where you found them, they would play in order. And I think that kind of speaks to my perspective on this game a bit, where it didn't really fix any of the problems I had with Breath of the Wild. It kind of exasperated them, and the things it did do new were, to some extent, were really cool in some areas, some less, or some I was less of a fan of. But there's something about this game that I think, even though I was having fun with it moment to moment, that started to deteriorate over time. And I remember there was a moment, I was probably hour 25 into the depths. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I throwing light seeds everywhere just to explore more of this dark area, which doesn't really matter at all? There's nothing interesting happening down here. Every time I throw a seed, it shows more boring walls. And that's where the game once I started analyze this game under a critical lens, it just started to fall apart from me. I'm like, oh god, I started pulling at this thread, and the whole thing started to unravel. Now, all that being said, I still had fun with this game, and I think, I would prefer to play it over a lot of other games still. Yeah. I had a lot of fun, but it's just hard not to see areas that, I think missed opportunities, things that could have done better. The parts of Breath of the Wild that really worked, I wanted them to double down on that, and they didn't really. They just went into this kind of odd new direction, which is still fun and impressive. Ultra Hand is an amazing mechanic, just I don't think the best fit for Zelda. Now, Jake, I know you've got some takes on Tears of the Kingdom, and I don't think we need to go over all 2 hours of our discussion before, but we are even more months out now from that. So how are you feeling overall?
Yeah, I think the thing that I think honestly what's been on my mind is that I've been thinking a lot about, I really loved Breath of the Wild, and I would still champion that game above Tears of the Kingdom for me. And I think like when we talk about the memories, there is a way that makes way more sense in my mind than the way that the storytelling is done in Tears of the Kingdom.
Right.
I like the idea of like this concept of like stepping into somebody else's memory and like why one would choose to tell a story out of order and like what effect that has on the player. And I feel like Tears of the Kingdom is a game that completely misunderstands why you would choose that storytelling method. And the reason it tells the story out of order is because that's how the game works. And there is no storytelling reason for it. And like my biggest thing with Tears of the Kingdom, it's just two big things. One, I find the narrative to be, and I really mean this, and it's not, I'm not trying to sound like I have a hot take or anything. I really feel this way. I find the storytelling to be like embarrassing. I like everything it tries to signal to me as the player in the game, from the moment of that first cutscene exploring the cave with Zelda to like the very end where you're doing stuff with Ganon. It just like wants to force me to feel a certain way without doing any narrative scaffolding or like blueprinting throughout the actual video game. It's just like, and I said this in our video, but I feel like every moment in this game is the same out of context as it is in context. There are no ideas, themes, or otherwise that are built up as you're playing the game. It just is exactly what it is showing you on the surface and nothing more. And then the second thing, it's kind of what you were saying, Andre, with exploring the depths and then realizing that there's really nothing to it. That's kind of how I feel about every element in the game, where it's like you start using fusion on like arrows and you go, oh my God, this is so cool. I can't wait to see all of the different effects. And then you see them and you go, okay, there's 5 I'm gonna kind of think about. And then everything else I don't really care about. Right. And I think the act of thinking about it is more interesting than the fun of playing with it. And that's how I feel about a lot of the game. Like using Ascend to go through a ceiling, that's a cool idea. It's interesting. It's impressive in a way. It's like, it's all of these things, but I don't think the act of Ascension is a fun thing to do. And I feel the same way about Ultra Hand. I think Ultra Hand is like cool and it's interesting and you use it in some of these little parts and I go, wow, this is really cool. But I'm not like itching to glue stuff together. And I know that kind of sounds silly, but I really mean it. It's like the mechanics are more interesting than they are fun. And I do think it's maybe the most impressive game of the year, but it's definitely not the most fun for me. Yeah.
I'll say playing it, I kind of burnt out probably about halfway through Tears of the Kingdom, even though I was having a great time. But just the story didn't draw me to go forward more. But part of it too is like, you know in Zelda when you're going around and like you see grass and it's like, I have to cut this grass. And for Tears of the Kingdom, there's so much to do at a time. It's like, I just want to get to the other side of the field, but you see like 5 things and it's like, it's going to be like 30 minutes, an hour later by the time I get to this other side of the field. It's hard for me to turn off that part of my brain to go on, and just so many ideas in it. But things like the Ultra Hand, I feel like almost they went too far into it, even though it created the neat social media moments. I feel like I don't need all of that in a Zelda for me to enjoy it. So thinking back, like they spent that extra year to polish the physics, but would I have been happier if they just did less and made a more Zelda-like Zelda? Like I would have. Like they have to experiment and try new things, but maybe they pushed it so far they didn't have to.
There's a lot to be said about focus and like focusing on a few things that work really well. But I even think they said in interviews, the director and producer, they've said like they wanted to put so much into this game, and I'm like, I could tell. And it doesn't always work for the better. Like I just did a video about how Aonuma is wrong about the traditional Zelda formula, when the quote basically said he didn't understand why people would want to go back to that traditional style that's more linear, more restrictive. And I'm just like, just because something's more linear and more restrictive doesn't mean it's bad. And nobody is saying to only make those old Zelda games again. They're just saying like, yeah, keep Zelda open world. At least that's what I'm saying. Keep Zelda open world, but like have some focus in it. Like just because like openness, being more open doesn't always mean being better. Like Bethesda should have taken that note when they made Starfield. So, and I feel like, but Nintendo Tears of the Kingdom's not like that open to that extent. But even still, I just think like, some more focus would be appreciated in the next Zelda game.
Really quick on that point, Joey, I've been thinking a lot about the Fire Temple, okay? And like the Fire Temple is so interesting to me because it's like it presents as a puzzle. And I understand how somebody could make the argument that it's a puzzle, but I would push back. And I would say, actually, looking back on it, I feel like it's a playground or like a sandbox where the goal is to like hit some switches, and you can and like it looks like a puzzle and it sounds like a puzzle, but there's really nothing in there that is what I think people want from puzzles in video games.
The biggest lie ever told is that Tears of the Kingdom got rid of the Divine Beast. The dungeons are just Divine Beasts without the central gimmick that you can control.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, Joey, to your point, that I will say I don't want them to go back to traditional Zelda, but I do think there are, probably as you were saying in your video, there are elements of those games that they could take and incorporate into open world to really kind of find a good middle ground here. And I think that would also benefit the dungeons, Jake, rather than just going on this, what's essentially a fetch quest for Switches, to like, a more organized, perhaps a more traditional puzzle-based system, a linear system, but yeah, I don't know.
Am I crazy for wanting this franchise to just be like an RPG? Is that like crazy of me?
A little bit.
Really? Okay. I have this vision for like the world and all the different races, and I'm like, there's a lot of opportunity for characters here. And I think sometimes,
for sure,
sometimes this game nails it. There's like that couple with the little kid, the girl in Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm like, you are a shining spot in this game, kid. Like, you have a personality, like, dear God. And there's a part of me that's like, I know this is so lame, so forgive me for saying it, but I'm like, can we just make like a Zelda that's like Witcher, man? Like would that be the biggest crime? Would that, like, I don't know. Yeah,
that's what you're saying. I mean, for me, Majora's Mask still has the best characterization of any Zelda, and that was also a much smaller scale too. And I wonder if there is an angle here Nintendo could go with, where you keep the open world idea, but on a vastly reduced scale. I don't need a world in which I spend hours traversing it. Like, there are still parts of the world of Tears of the Kingdom after 150 hours I still have not seen, and it's probably gonna forever remain that way. And I think that kind of sucks. It's kind of a missed opportunity. That not everyone's gonna be able to see perhaps some really cool elements of the game. I think a smaller, more focused world while retaining the openness of it could really benefit it and allow them to better design things that everyone will see.
Andre, you said something to me once, and it stuck in my head ever since you said it, where you were like, if this had multiplayer, and I was like, and I just think about this a lot, where I'm like, I think Nintendo could really have something if the Zelda IP was ripped from this thing, and it was made like a new multiplayer focused game that's kind of like Minecraft-y and like who it's going for. I really, man, I like see that clearly being a huge success for Nintendo. I don't know.
Oh, if you were doing Ultra Hand with your friends, like, I know my friends would love that.
Oh my God, dude. Let's go make a little racetrack over here, then we'll each make a car and we'll race them. Yeah, done.
It's actually shocking that Nintendo, I'm actually partially surprised Nintendo has said there won't be any DLC for this game. Like, Alan Newman has basically said everything you want to put in the game is in the game. I'm like, there's probably a few things you could do with it still. Maybe not story-based content, but at the least having some kind of like shareable database where you can like share blueprints with each other. That'd be amazing. Like, I see all this cool stuff on TikTok. I'm like, that looks amazing. I'm not gonna spend 5 hours of my day building that thing, And that's the case of most of the stuff, all the cool stuff I see. I'm like, that looks so cool. I'm not gonna figure it out, And that sucks that we can't enjoy all this cool content. It's the Ultra Hand is such an amazing mechanic, and it's actually held back by being in Zelda. I would love to see them explore that more outside of in a more sandbox-like environment.
Andre, do you remember Water Temple, though? There was that one thing where if the physics worked out, you should have been able to cheese that one part where it was like, oh, I'm spraying this or whatever, and it like didn't work. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Oh, I don't know if I...
There was like that turnstile.
Oh, okay. I remember. Okay, that's what you're talking. Yeah, that's actually what came to mind. Yeah, where what was it that I had? I had like some kind of water dispensing item or something. Yeah. And I thought, I'll just spray the water wheel with that or whatever it was, and it should work. And it didn't, because it relied on the specific power of my teammate with me, the Zora guy.
Sidon,
and yeah, thanks. And that actually felt so unlike Breath of the Wild to me. Like this is the one case where it felt like traditional Zelda, but it doesn't work here because it's not traditional Zelda.
Yes, and I only bring this up because when you talk about like seeing all the cool stuff on TikTok and stuff, I did those Hyrule Happening videos, and it became very clear to me after a few episodes of that I was like, wait a second. Yeah, there's a bunch of crazy stuff people are making, but it falls into one of 3 categories: big thing, spinny thing, car. And that's it. And it wasn't that impressive after a certain amount of time. And I was like, I wonder how much the physics are like, they have to work, and they always work. Like the game is that's what's most impressive about the game, is that you put stuff together and it always works. But at the end of the day, like, how many interesting things are there to do within the world and within the system? Like, not to be a Debbie Downer again, but you can't dig. And I think that would add a lot. I think it would add a lot. And water physics is another thing that's like not really in the game. And
you know what I'm picturing? Every time you dig, you just like fall into that giant abyss that has a depth. So you just fall to your death.
That'd be awesome. I'd be all about that. But
how does Hyrule even work? There's no ground below it. It's just a giant abyss that holds us up somehow. I don't get it.
That's funny. We got to map out that planetoid. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. We covered all of Tears of the Kingdom. This may have to be a part 2 at this point. I don't know how we're going to divide this up.
And it turns out we did split these into 2 parts, so stay tuned for part 2 of our 2023 year in review discussion going up soon. But if it's already up, you can click the link in the description to go straight to it. So we'll see you in part 2, everyone. Bye-bye.